Let's move on to our trending topic. We're going to talk about the psychology of Tom Hanks, the Hollywood icon, one of the most decent guys in all of Hollywood. And his most recent film, It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, is now playing in theaters. And so in honor of that film and Tom Hanks, we're going to talk about the psychology of this man. So I want to back up a step and say there are lots of stories that float out there about different actors, some of them being difficult, some of them being complicated, tricky. You'd be hard-pressed to find any story legitimate story that says anything other than Tom Hanks is one of the nicest people you ever meet. In fact, the New York Times just published a story. This came out very recently, within the month. And here's a quote from that. This is a quote. "So Tom Hanks is as nice as you think he is and exactly what you hope him to be." And then it goes on to say, "That's awesome, except when you're trying to write a story about him where there has to be tension and, something bad, to make the story interesting." So here's my question. We don't, obviously, when we talk about celebrities, we don't know them. We don't really have a sense of their inner workings. But there's a bunch of questions in this idea of niceness. The first is, how do you think someone can be so nice in a profession that everything's pulling you toward being self-centered, self-interested, kind of abrupt, even a little bit, I don't want to say mean, but a little bit just sort of like, do this for me and get out of my way. How is that even, how do you navigate that, do you think?
I have a thought. In reading about sort of what he was like as a kid and getting into theater early on and being comfortable sort of spazzing out about things, he was, I'm assuming, securely attached. He was able to just go to theaters whenever he wanted and bought one ticket. He'd sit through the whole thing, dig into the play, the playbill, and it's like he just had this drive to be a part of this world. And the first exposure to it was more theater and acting classes that is not your Hollywood type setting. And then over time, it seems as if he's surrounded himself with other kind people, like Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg, so that he's got a community of not mean people.
They're kind of, for each other, they're sort of modeling that for each other back and forth. Yeah.
So his community kind of supports that idea, I guess. Because he was even with Ron Howard back during Happy Days.
Is that true?
Yeah, he made 3 guest appearances on that show as one of the bosom buddies.
Oh.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tom Hanks seems to have a very strong moral compass because it's one of those industries where it's very easy to get caught up in materialism and, comparing yourself, how am I doing to somebody else, and competition. And then it really is something where he seems to be very intentional from, again, my perspective, that when he picks a film, it's almost as though what's the message? What's he trying to hit home? Is there any semblance for inspiration, hope, creating an insight, something along those lines? Because if we're just picking random movies, like there was one movie I was thinking about where I think it was like a Bachelor movie I saw it a long time ago.
Bachelor Party.
Bachelor Party. Duh. Okay. Bachelor Party. Sorry.
It's about a party
movie about a bachelor.
Here's sweet Tom Hanks' character, and he's like trying to get married, I think, in that movie.
Yep.
So I don't know. I just think he's even in like very debauchery-esque things potentially.
Debauchery-esque.
He's trying.
1930 called and wants its word back.
Well, he's trying
The debauchery-esque.
to push something positive, which I think is very admirable.
And I was watching The Green Mile last night, actually.
Oh, great movie.
And it's an incredible movie. And you're right about these roles. I can't think of a role where he's a jerk or anything. And they're all kind roles, and how he can make those roles interesting, even though he's playing this kind guy over and over and over.
Well, but what I'd add to that is he's not just playing himself over and over again.
No,
Like,
no.
If you look at his character in Sully, his character in Philadelphia, his character in Saving Private Ryan, I mean, these are different lived-in humans. I mean, they're
Yes.
not. But you're right. He's picking roles that have a kind of fundamental dignity about each of them and a sense of integrity to them. So yeah, I think there is that. So let me. I don't want to harp on this, but let me continue with this, because I think one of the things we've established on this podcast in the past is it would be extraordinarily hard to be a famous person and still maintain a sense of just being a good guy. You know, like it would be. There's just so many. There are so many forces arrayed against you. Right? You've got one force that's like promoting a sense of narcissism. You're the best. You're awesome. You're special. Kind of push that. And so it'd be easy to believe that. You've got this other side of constant sort of scrutiny and attack and digging into your life and wanting to kind of pull back and not kind of engage that or not be a genuine person. You've got the money that comes with it. You've got all of the stuff that just is arrayed against you. And yet you've got really these stories every once in a while, Tom Hanks being one of them, of a person that is just fundamentally good and nice. I like what Frank was saying about surrounding yourself with other people like that. But what do you think also, you mentioned being securely attached. What do you think also would have to be part of that for a person to psychologically to maintain that sense of just, I'm a nice, decent person who really treats people very well?
I think I'm just speculating, but I think he is very grounded in his rituals and routines. He talks about going to Greek Orthodox Church. He converted when he got remarried. He's obsessed with these typewriters. He built an app so people can use an app so they know what it feels like to use an old typewriter. So he's got sort of these areas of interest that allows it's
kind of grounding.
It's grounding. It's predictable. I bet you he eats the same breakfast every day, just saying.
Well, he might. And I feel like that is an aspect that is something to consider. One of the things I discovered when I was learning more about him is that I'm assuming this is accurate, he moved and lived, by the time he was 10 years of age, 10 years old, he lived in 10 different homes.
Yep.
And I feel like when people go through that much transition, it's either you're going to rise to the occasion and learn how to navigate social issues, especially if you're, the new student and you got to make a connection. So you got to be able to read people really well. And so you're going to have to pick up on nonverbals. You're going to have to be able to monitor and regulate your own emotions where, maybe this kind of plays into the Hollywood vibe, is that there's a way to give feedback and to discuss an issue across the board that I imagine, can't say for sure, but I imagine Hanks probably does a nice job with that. So he's not lashing out at any producer or director or, coworker. And so he's been able to sustain and potentially repair relationships if there has ever been something.
All those moves in childhood reminded me of our other podcast on Keanu Reeves, who is also an exceptionally kind person, which I think adds to what you're saying. You go through all these changes in life. I'm not sure it's post-traumatic growth, but it sharpens your skill set.
That's, to be honest, I didn't know that about him, and that's fascinating to me because I made that connection too about Keanu Reeves. I would just intuitively expect the opposite. Mm-hmm. Like I would expect if someone had 10 homes in 10 years, it would interfere with your ability to form significant attachments and long-lasting relationships and be able to know people well enough to have that empathy that would drive you to being, that kind.
Dave, let me help you with that. Let me be your example.
Go for it. 9
homes, 10 years. This guy. You see how well that turned out?
Exactly.
But then I went to like 9 or 8 different high schools before I went to college. Or not high schools, sorry, just schools. So, I mean,
Okay.
I moved a lot too.
Well, so then
It's perception. That's how I would assume.
but tell me tell me the mechanism of it. Like how does that help you be a kinder or more empathetic person? Like what does that do? Yeah.
So literally it boils down to perception, and I think a lot about the kind of dual nature that we all have. So we can be both a happy person but feel sad. We can also be very angry but calm on the outside. And so there's a way to kind of balance these pieces where you're not attributing a situation to something is wrong with me per se. And then there might be opportunities where you say, you know what, I do need to course correct. And it just is, it's all about the decision making and the choices that we have. And so I don't know, but that's me speaking personally. But I do think perception really matters, because if you're choosing to focus on what's not going well in your life, then the reality is you're going to find those examples, you're going to feel more sad, and then it creates that sort of negative spiral, as opposed to if you're looking and still working towards good, your odds are higher. There's no certainty. That's the thing. There's nothing in life is certain.
Mm-hmm. Frank, do you have any to add to that of how that sense of moving all the time could contribute to a greater depth of connection and empathy?
I mean, I think for some people it does. I think it's also what your biological predisposition is, who you're surrounded by in terms of parents, friends, environment. So I would say I got sort of the short end of the stick a little bit on that area.
Well, but can I push back?
Well, hold on. But it allowed me to kind of be in situations and learn some really tough life lessons that helped me become a good psychologist. Decent one. Still working on it. But add to that, Dr. Wright.
Well, because, I mean, I think what Dave is getting at here, Dr. Hagen, is all about the protective factors that we have. So, obviously intelligence, having a certain level of intelligence is going to be an advantage to being able to function in the world, to, it influences all sorts of things, but then personality factors. So although Frank can sometimes be a ridiculous human, he is very funny and he actually is better able to cope with stress than he probably recognizes.
I am much better these days.
And then having good social protective factors. So even if, you have just one friend, it's still one friend. And that's important. Not saying Frank only has one friend.
So you're saying I have one friend.
Frank has lots of friends. And there are also emotional protective factors, like being able to talk openly and honestly about your feelings.
And
so
if
you are willing to share and process and care for others, so there's a lot of things that kind of can buffer some of the transitional stuff that we were talking about.
I am with her.
So here's another thing that it might be complicated to wade into, or it might be pretty simple. But here's another thing about Tom Hanks that I'm wondering about. So he is, by all accounts, by every standard, a very genuinely kind, nice person. And he is also an extraordinarily good actor. He's not just a personality. He's not just a good stage presence. He is a very, very good actor. He's, Oscar winner, has picked roles with a depth to them. You would kind of think that somebody that needed to have the sort of mindset and temperament to be sort of like unfazed by the world or unjaded might lack some of the understanding of people, the depth of the world, kind of like in order to kind of pull from. And yet, he's played people in war. He's played people that are stranded on islands. He's played a man dying of AIDS. He's a mentally handicapped person, all with a depth to them. Talk about how do these things fit together where you've got this sort of fundamentally good guy that kind of probably has a pretty positive outlook on life and yet is able to kind of dig in deeply into the human condition?
I mean, I would say even though he may externally to the outer world seem very put together, odds are high, don't know him, let's be clear, that there could be a lot of things internally that he's experienced. And so, just because somebody's really kind, like I think a lot about like great spiritual leaders, they have seen and experienced a great deal of suffering because they're following whatever it is that's guiding their belief system. And so when we have a belief, it is literally the choice point to say, okay, how am I going to choose to act and respond? And if you can connect with deep pain or deep hurting, even if it's not the same exact story, then you can relate to it. And you can say, all right, if I was in their shoes, how might I feel? So then that awareness helps guide and push forward how he chooses to interact with the external world.
I would give probably a more black and white answer in that I think he has exceptional talent and that he is, like he goes after all these typewriters. He's like knows everything about typewriters. I think he's one of those guys that's dug in there and knows everything about acting, and he's just crafted it, and that's what he does.
It's just a skill set that he has.
It's a skill set. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
It's probably strength. I agree with that because it's like the strength of curiosity. So if he's curious about, let's say, the human condition, even though maybe he hasn't actually experienced, being in war, then he can really kind of know as much about it and really dive into the knowledge and just have that open mindset to see, what comes up. How would I feel? So I like that idea.
Yeah. And you said something about spiritual leaders. I'll tell you, this past week, I saw a speaker named Rob Bell, and he was talking about, among other things, how he was asked to share a platform with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And he was like, oh yeah, and me. And
me.
And so he's backstage and waiting for this event, and Desmond Tutu comes in one door, Dalai Lama comes in another door, and they meet each other and they start hugging and then tickling each other. And like they're tickling and grabbing each other and giggling and being all silly. And he was like, not what I expected.
No.
And then he realized, like, these are men that have experienced tremendous loss and hardship. You think about what Desmond Tutu's experienced through apartheid. You think about what the Dalai Lama's experienced through being exiled. You think about all the stuff that they've had to deal with. And it's like he says, and they come out on the other side of it, and they're these kind, gentle, playful people. And yet underneath there is a very deep understanding of people. So that's what I don't know that Tom Hanks, I don't know that we have enough information to say he's had this incredibly deep amount of trauma or difficulty, but it is very possible that someone could experience a lot of the world, a lot of understanding of the hard pieces of the world, and still come out on the other side as a very playful, fun, kind person. So I think it's rare, but I think it's possible.
Hey,
right.
The next time I come to Nashville, can we tickle each other?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Just
good.
thought I'd ask.
Yeah. Always worth asking them.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So let me wrap up this conversation about Tom Hanks with just a very practical, fun thing. He's been in some great movies. We probably could come up with a list of 12 to 15 outstanding movies of his, which is very rare for any actor to have a canon of film that's that deep. But let me just throw out some. Tell me what your favorite Tom Hanks performance, not necessarily film, although it could be the same, but performance is. So it'd be Saving Private Ryan, Sully, Philadelphia, Castaway, You've Got Mail, Captain Phillips, Sleepless in Seattle, The Post, Catch Me If You Can, Forrest Gump, Toy Story, etc. We could keep going. Any League of Their Own.
Mine's easy.
Big. Those are just a handful. All right, Frank.
Castaway, hands down.
Yeah.
Why so?
One of the best performances I've ever seen because he can't really talk. He's interacting with a freaking volleyball
Yeah.
for like the whole daggone movie, and
Wilson.
Wilson. He's just, I mean, how do you do that? You're not talking, you're walking around, and I don't know. I'm dumbfounded by that performance.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I am not going to lie. We've obviously spoiled it, but if you haven't seen it at this point, I'm sorry. It's time. Yeah. It's time. So, yeah, I bawled my eyes out when Wilson went out to see it. Bawled my eyes out. So I was also going to say Castaway, but I would say Forrest Gump, too. So that is one of, hands down, the soundtrack on that thing and just, the depth to him, even though he was a simple man. I loved that.
My second favorite performance was Castaway. Because of the accent favorite? He pulls out.
Castaway?
First favorite's
Oh, did I say? First and second?
Oh, I mean, Catch Me If You Can. Yeah. Where he's like, knock, knock.
Knock.
That was so great. And his interaction with Leo is, I need to watch that movie again.
Yeah, I love those too. I'd add, Forrest Gump for me is top of the list, but I would also put Big on the list as great Tom Hanks performances. Mm-hmm. And also the very, very ending, the final scene of Captain Phillips is like a all-timer. Well, he's in a new movie. It's about another kind man, Mr. Rogers, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. We hope you check it out. We'll probably be talking about that or something around that theme pretty soon. So check out that movie. Our final segment is something that we call Doctor's Orders. These are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. And Emma Kate, you start.
So I have been working on goal setting, and I think that's something that Tom Hanks probably does very well, I would assume. And a book that I have stumbled across, I can't remember if I've recommended this before, but I am back at it. It is called Smarter, Faster, Better, The Transformative Power of Real Productivity. So this is by Charles Duhigg, who also, or Duhigg, Charles.
Charles.
Sorry, Charles. But he also has a podcast, and it's a great one. But this book is fantastic because it talks a lot about motivation and decision making and choice and having SMART goals. So being specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. So I would check it out if you are wanting to be more productive as you prepare to enter the new year in 2020.
And Frank,
I want to recommend the Disney Plus short film, 7 minutes long, called Float. And I resisted seeing it because one of my specialties is the spectrum, and I feel like media usually gets it wrong or stereotypes it. But I want to say this is hands down the best visualization of what it would be like to be the parent of a child on the spectrum. And there are only 5 words spoken. I highly recommend it, and you can go to Shrink Tank to read my article on it as of today.
Sounds good. My recommendation is if you like historical dramas, and this is a series that I thought I would just watch because my wife and I would have a show that we could watch together. Because she didn't like all the Walking Dead shows and Game of Thrones and things that I would watch. So we started watching The Crown, right? The Crown. And it is in season, I almost said The Queen, but it's The Crown. Season 3, and it's a new cast playing the older versions of the royalties. So I would highly recommend it. Really good stuff. They're just solid episode after episode. Very solid, very good. So that's my recommendation for you. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. For Emma Kate Wright and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.